You're listening to the Effective Statistician podcast, the weekly podcast with Alexander Schacht and Benjamin Pieske. Oh, and today we have a new one, and with Sam Gardner. And this podcast is designed to help you reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients without becoming overwhelmed by work. Yes, we have a new podcast host, a new co-host for this podcast, which has now more than 150 episodes, and we are adding another co-host. So stay tuned for this episode where we introduce you to Sam and his insights into non-clinical statistics, and you'll hear more from him in the future. So Sam is a really nice guy. He also participated, by the way, in the Effective Statistician Leadership Program, and so we spent quite a lot of time together there. He worked at the same company like me and like Gary, who also works on the Effective Statistician Leadership Program. And so we had quite a lot of interesting discussions. He is one of those, you'll learn more about that in the other podcast, who reacted to my episode 150, where I asked for volunteers for another podcast host. So stay tuned for this episode where you'll learn more about Sam, his career in statistics, and he has a really interesting career. So watch out for that. It's surely not the straight linear careers that you would expect. And you will also, on the way, get a lot of insights into non-clinical statistics. And I think these things will help us better understand our overall industry. And so, maybe that is also something for you in the future. I'm producing this podcast in association with PSI, a community dedicated to leading and promoting the use of statistics within the healthcare industry for the benefit of patients. Join PSI today to further develop your statistical capabilities with access to the ever-growing video-on-demand content library, free registration to all PSI webinars, and much more. Visit the PSI website at psiweb.org to learn more about PSI activities and become a PSI member today. Welcome to another podcast. And today we are speaking not just Benjamin and myself, it's also Sam, our new co-host on this show. So welcome, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks. And thanks for inviting me to be part of the podcast.
Yep. Yeah. So that is an outcome from episode 150, where I asked where, there's other people that would potentially be interested. And yeah, so we have another co-host.
Yeah, very welcome. That's very good to have you here, Sam. And I'm really curious in getting to know you a little bit more in this podcast episode. So what we are going to use today is introducing Sam. So
Yep. Because Sam actually fits quite nicely into our area because he has a completely different background than Benjamin and myself. So can add a lot of value about things that, to be honest, I have no clue about. So it will be really good to ask you lots of different questions. But let's first go a little bit into your career, because there's a couple of really interesting points in it. So maybe we start with, how did you learn about this podcast and how did you kind of get connected to it?
Well, I think my introduction to it might have been through seeing something on LinkedIn that was posted. And then I also enrolled in the Effective Statistician Leadership Program. I think I was in one of the initial, maybe the first wave that went through, the first cohort. And that was really great, very beneficial for me personally as a statistician. And you and Gary Sullivan led that training course. So that was helpful. So I got to know you a little bit that way as well. And then I just listened to the podcast. I enjoy it. It's good. It's very relevant content for me as a statistician, and it's fun for me to listen to while I'm on the weekend out cutting the grass in my lawn, or just working around the house, or if I'm driving somewhere. It's a nice podcast for me to listen to and pass the time.
Yeah. In terms of passing time, I learned about one of your favorite hobbies is smoking. And
Yes,
it's not about
I
cigarette
love
smoking.
not cigarettes, nothing inhaled smoking. It's smoking meats.
Yeah.
Yes. So I like to smoke meat. I like to make bacon, speck, and I'm pretty good at that, I think, now. And smoked beef is a lot of fun. Smoked pork, I do a lot of. So yeah, I enjoy that quite a bit.
Okay, so where exactly do you live?
I'll send you my directions. Okay, you can find me on your favorite map software.
Very tempting. So
yeah. Okay, so so that already explains you're most likely living in the US, actually in Indiana.
Yes.
Homegrown in Indiana.
Born in Kentucky, right across the river in Louisville, Kentucky. And then I grew up in the southern part of Indiana. I went to university in Indiana. I attended Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology for 2 years, where I studied physics and chemistry. And then I transferred to Purdue University for my last 2 years of my undergraduate degree. And I changed my major to mathematics while I was at Purdue.
Okay, very good. Yeah. And when you went outside of university, you did a really interesting step, which I have, to be honest, very rarely seen.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate that I had a Reserve Officer Training Corps scholarship from the United States Air Force. And so while I was in university, I took military training as part of my regular coursework. And through that training and through that program, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force when I graduated from Purdue University. And so then right after I graduated, a few months later, I went on active duty as a military officer. And I spent a total of 12 years in the Air Force.
Yep. But as a mathematician and statistician.
Right. As a mathematician, as a military analyst, maybe it would be the best way to describe what I did. My first job in the Air Force was working in a group that built and maintained simulation models of weapon systems. And these simulation models were at different levels of fidelity. Some of them were very detailed. They would model the fly out of a missile using sort of a finite element method type approach, where every millisecond, how far did the missile go and what direction was it going, and then do it again and simulate the forces on the missile and what it was trying to do and the direction it was trying to go to see if the missile could actually go where it needed or planned to go. All the way up to very high level models of taking all of that information and summarizing it into more of a probabilistic model. So if you took an aircraft and flew it at a certain distance and certain altitude away and a certain speed from a surface to air missile site, would this aircraft be able to survive that flight path, or would it be likely that aircraft would be shot down? And then those missiles, those models were then used in campaign simulation models where they'd say, well, what's the best way to fly an aircraft through a network of air defense systems? And, that was also at the time, right around the time when the Soviet Union was still around, it was kind of
Cold War.
Yeah, Cold War, right? It was right at the end of the Cold War when I got involved with that. So, it was kind of a neat job for a young 21, 22-year-old kid, really, to learn about Soviet surface-to-air missile systems and air-to-air missile systems and integrated air defense systems. And yeah, it was really kind of fun. And I learned a lot about just general technology, computing technology, programming, and problem solving.
Yeah,
So that was just my first assignment in the Air Force. I did that for about 3 years.
Yeah, and from a technical point of view, I really can imagine there must be completely different challenges. I mean, today in our days of, cloud computing, and stuff like this, it's just, you do a simulation like, easy task. You program whatever it is, and then you just let it run. And if it does, it's not within 2 seconds, then it takes you 3 seconds. But how was this done at that time? And wasn't this like from the power that the computer had at that time to simulate such quite complex models, must have been quite a challenge to get a program or was in place.
Yeah, it really was. And we had pretty good computing technology for the time. Yeah. That was in the 1989, 1990 timeframe. And so we had some nice Unix systems. We had a VAX mainframe system. We had PCs, and we use them fully. We use their full capability, and we would have simulations that sometimes would run for days or even weeks to get an answer. Now, I think today, with the advent of cloud-based computing and parallel, you could parallelize a lot of that type of computation. You could probably do those a lot faster. But then, what happens when the computing technology gets better? You try to solve bigger problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
Absolutely.
I think we did one calculation where we had this grand plan to do this huge simulation, and based on the computing power we had, it would end up taking hundreds of years to complete. So of course we had to scale back our plans.
Yeah. So basically, you were already a data scientist at that time.
In some respect, it was more of I guess I would call it a modeling scientist at that time. I learned a lot about just models in general, and that's paid off throughout my career, because whether it's a model of a system that's trying to model it based on a first principles physics model, or whether it's a higher level model that's just using probabilistic ideas, or later on in my career where I started to use regression modeling and things like that, it's kind of the same concepts apply, that I'm going to pull it out, the George Box quote, right? That says all models are wrong, but some models are useful. It's a paraphrase of what he said. And that holds true whether it's a statistical model or a engineering model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that quote was on either my master's thesis or my PhD thesis. I don't remember exactly, but yeah. So, and then you went into the pharmaceutical industry, and to the company where I worked as well for 15 years, and Gary worked as well for nearly 30 years, Lilly in Indiana, but not on the pharmaceutical side or on the kind of clinical side with clinical studies and all these kind of things. But again, actually something that is much more closer to what we could call now a data science.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the path that led me there. So while I was in undergraduate school, when I changed my major to mathematics from physics and chemistry, I met with my advisor and new mathematics advisor, and he looked at me and he said, "You ought to take a class in probability and statistics as to finish out your degree." And in my body language, I kind of nodded my head and went, well, okay. In my head, I said, no way am I going to take a statistics class. That is boring. You have to keep in mind, my only exposure to statistics as an undergraduate was like in a laboratory class where you had to calculate a mean or a standard deviation or do a regression line.
Yeah.
That was all I knew about statistics. So I said, no way. And so I just took a lot of applied mathematics, linear algebra, numerical analysis, and then the theory courses that I had to take to get my degree. And then when I was in that first job in the Air Force, I was able to enroll in a part-time master's degree program in mathematics. And it was a non-thesis program. So all I had to do was take 11 graduate courses in mathematics. And I had taken 8 courses, and they, again, were all applied mathematics and theory, no statistics. And I had 3 courses to take, and the only courses that were available that would let me graduate in the time frame that I wanted to were mathematical statistics 1 and 2, and experimental design. And I was really not happy about it. I kind of remember just rolling my eyes and complaining about, oh, I have to take a statistics class. But you know what? I took a mathematical statistics class and I just fell in love with statistics, just purely based on the beauty of the mathematics behind it. And then I took experimental design and I fell in love with it even more because of the practicality of statistics and the ability it would have to allow me to be involved with solving problems using data. And so that was how I got into statistics. So I finished my master's degree in statistics and just having, or master's degree in mathematics, only having those 3 statistics classes. And then the Air Force graciously sent me to school full time to study statistics. I applied for a program. And so they sent me to the University of Kentucky, and I was in the PhD program there. And unfortunately, I didn't finish my PhD. That's one of my major regrets in life, but that's what life is sometimes. And so I went through the whole PhD program, but I didn't finish my dissertation. But I got a really great, solid education foundation. A lot of the program there was based on mathematical statistics. And I love that because I just love the math. But I also had a lot of exposure to multivariate analysis and modeling. I took a really great class in econometrics, 2 econometrics classes that was taught by a professor in the econ department. And those are really great because it was all about building models, based on observational data. And so I love that. And the dissertation topic that I had pursued was kind of on the boundary of multivariate analysis and mathematical statistics. So, I got a really good, solid mathematical foundation that's really benefited me throughout my career. And then I spent my time in the Air Force. So I did the whole 12 years being a military analyst. I taught statistics for a few years at the Air Force Institute of Technology, which is the Air Force's graduate school. And I discovered there that although I thought I'd love to be an academic, I really didn't want to be an academic because of the research part of it. And not so much research in of itself, but just it seemed like a lot of it was research for research only. And not really focused on solving a problem that someone had. And that's what I love. I love solving problems. And so I discovered that about myself. And so after the 12 years in the Air Force that I had to serve, because they spent all this time sending me to school, so I had to pay back my time while I was in school. Then I left the military and I joined Eli Lilly, working at a manufacturing plant here in my hometown where they did small molecule active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing, and also the research and development on how to figure out how to make new APIs, new small molecule APIs, and also test the quality of those new APIs. So I got hired there as a statistician to support that type of work.
API is for active pharmaceutical ingredient, I guess.
Active pharmaceutical ingredient. Yes. Sometimes it's also called drug substance. It depends on who you talk to and which regulatory guidance people like to follow. But we either say API or drug substance that's the actual molecule that is the medicine.
Yeah. And that gets formulated, so packaged into lots of other stuff so that you can actually take it.
So it can get put into a tablet. It can get put into an injectable solution. It can be lyophilized, which means it's dried out in a freezer using freeze drying. And then it comes along with a diluent, another solution that needs to be used to put it back into solution before it's used. There's lots of different formulations and forms of drug products that use drug substances.
Okay, so your background in chemistry is then also coming as a plus in working in that environment.
Yeah, so having studied chemistry for a couple of years, and then also later after I joined Lilly and worked in that area, the chemical manufacturing area, I went back to school at Purdue University, which was right across the river, literally like 5 miles from where I was working was Purdue University. So I went back to where I got my original degree and finished my degree in chemistry, mainly because I wanted to learn more about chemistry so I could be more effective as a statistician. That was really what it was. But also because I just love to learn and I love science. And I only had to take like 7 classes. So over a period of a couple of years, 2.5 years. I took those 7 classes, and it was very gracious that my boss at the time allowed me to do that and manage that with my work schedule and take the time I needed to go take my classes during the day and to just make sure I worked and made up my time in the evenings or weekends so that I could take my classes.
That's actually quite interesting. It's one of these common themes in statistics that whenever you want to do applied statistics, it's really helpful that you know much more about the area that you apply it in. Whatever it is, yeah, you just have better communication with the different people that you work with. You better understand the problems. You better understand the constraints. You better understand the opportunities within these problems, and so that makes things so much easier as a statistician. You're not reliant on kind of, basically sitting next to a scientist all the time because you need to ask him constantly all kind of different questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty clear. If you want to be effective as a statistician, you need to know the science or the technology or the general environment and terminology of the area that you're working in and helping with. Statistics doesn't exist as a science really on its own. At least I don't.
Mathematics statistics, maybe.
Maybe mathematical statistics a little bit, but really practical statistics exists in partnership with other areas that need help to solve problems using statistical thinking and statistical methods.
Yeah.
That's why I went back to school, and it was interesting. I had the opportunity because of that to work and change my career a little bit. And for 2 years, I worked in manufacturing as a manufacturing scientist. So I worked as a chemist that was responsible for a manufacturing process. And that was a lot different than working as a statistician. When you're a statistician, your typical work schedule is 9 to 5, and you can take your time off. Sometimes you have to work extra hours, but you're mostly working at a computer while you're doing your work or talking to people. Mm-hmm. This job was walking out in the manufacturing plant, inspecting things, making sure they were working right, getting phone calls at 2 a.m. in the morning because something broke.
Yeah.
and it had to be addressed. And my job was to address the problem from the standpoint of how do we get this process working again, and also what was the impact to quality on the material that the process was making when it broke. Yeah. And so, that was different. I enjoyed that because it was always a problem to solve. There were problems to solve every day, and I love solving problems, although it was a little bit exhausting because of the amount of work sometimes.
If the problem was every day, I mean, okay, but if it's every night, that's different.
There was, inevitably there'd be Friday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. when I was getting ready to head out the door, my phone would ring or the pager that I had at the time would go off, and I would see that it was someone, the operator in the manufacturing plant, calling me, and I went, oh no, I'm going to be here for another few hours. So,
Friday evening blues.
Yes, there's always these kind of, it always happens when, it's really bad timing. So there is actually one of the areas where then, the design of experiments really comes in these areas. And I don't understand a lot about design of experiments, but my kind of very, very uneducated understanding is that it's when you have basically, for example, you want to find, the best way to have some kind of product produced. And you have all these different variables like pressure and how many, ingredients you have from all the different materials and temperature and, all kind of different dimensions. Then, finding this optimum in this big space, big multidimensional space is really, really difficult. And so I think design of experiments is about kind of getting, to this optimum in the best way, in the most effective way.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects about experimental design that make it very useful as a tool in the manufacturing area.
Yeah.
number one, I think, would be efficiency. It's an efficient way to generate knowledge about a system. And I think that's probably one of the skills that I have, is being a systems thinker. I think about how things work, and I think about the inputs and the outputs and the controls in the system. And what you really want to understand is, how do the inputs and the controls of a system affect the output of a system?
How would you differentiate input and controls?
So an input would be maybe say for a drug product that you're making. One of the critical quality attributes of that drug product is the amount of impurities that are in that drug, right? Okay. Ideally, you don't want a high level of impurities, say, that might come from degradation of the drug substance or interaction between the drug substance and the excipients of the drug product, or there's different ways you can get impurities in a drug product, and those impurities can come from different places. They can come from the input materials that you're using. You can actually be using a drug substance that has impurities in it. Here's a little secret, if you don't know this: pretty much every drug substance has some impurities in it. It's just a fact of manufacturing. Now, what we do in the development of drug substances is to show that the levels of impurities are at a level that are not harmful, that are safe, and don't impact the safety of the product, the use of the product. But anyway, so you can get impurities that come from the input materials. You can also create impurities during the drug product manufacturing process. You could say you needed to use high temperature during a mixing step to get things to mix well. Well, that temperature might lead to degradation of the drug substance, or might cause a reaction between the drug substance and what's in the other parts of the drug, what we call the excipients of the drug. It could cause an interaction between the two and make an impurity. So, and that then impacts the output of the drug substance process. You typically have more impurities, but you also might have less of the active drug. So it impacts potentially both safety and efficacy. So that's the thing you need to do, is understand, how do those inputs to the process and the things that you can control while you're making the drug impact the outputs of the process.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's also thinking about systems. Yeah, so any kind of complex systems that has various way where you can alter things, and various way where things flow into it and get out of it. When you want to understand these systems in a statistical way, yes, then design of experiments is the choice to go.
Yeah, it's a very structured way to generate data so that you can answer a question with less ambiguity. A big problem that can happen when you do experimentation or generate data on a system is that you can have confounding. And statisticians know about confounding, right? If I said, I walk outside and I open my umbrella and it rains, you say, well, maybe it's I open my umbrella that it rains, and I walk out the next day and I don't open my umbrella and it didn't rain. Maybe it's because I didn't open my umbrella, it didn't rain, right? But we're looking at one factor, that I opened my umbrella, yes or no. But there are other factors out there that decide whether it's going to rain or not.
Yeah.
And that's a silly example, but there are real examples where people do that. They vary something, and they think that's the cause for the variation in the output of the process. But in reality, something else is changing at the same time. And that's what's causing the variation. The other thing they'll do is they'll vary two things at the same time in the same direction while doing an experiment. They'll vary temperature and pressure, right? And they'll go high temperature, high pressure, low temperature, low pressure, and they see a change in the response between those two conditions. And they want to know, well, was it temperature that caused the change, or was it pressure that caused the change? Was it both?
Yeah.
Is there an interaction between temperature and pressure? To do an efficient and effective experimental design, you design your studies so that you can estimate the effects of those two factors independently of each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets even more complex if you have 3, 4, 5
right
different.
Yeah, and we could probably do a whole session just on about experimental design if we wanted to. And it's hard to do with just words, but the concepts are not that complicated. It's really about avoiding confounding, and it's about being efficient in the number of experiments you need to do in order to estimate the effect of a factor on a system.
Okay. And then after all this work, you had a little bit of a detour, which is really interesting that you wanted to sell something.
That's right. I moved into sales and marketing. If you looked at my career path, or you looked at my work history on LinkedIn or my resume, you'd say, wow, it looks like Sam has a hard time keeping a job because I just move from place to place a lot. But no, just circumstances led me to want to look to do something different. And I found a job working for SAS. And I was introduced to one of their software products, SAS, right, in graduate school. I learned at the time when I was in graduate school, pretty much everyone learned SAS. And so I knew SAS. But then I got introduced to Jump, their software product that's a desktop graphical product, while I was in the Air Force. And I continued to use it through my career. And when I got to Lilly, we used it extensively, and I got to know it pretty well. So I thought I knew Jump pretty well. And so they hired me to work on a sales team to go out and help sell Jump software to new customers, or to get existing customers to continue to use it or buy more of it, have more people use it. And I learned a lot in that role. I was in that role at SAS for 5 years, and I learned a lot more about the software than I thought I knew. And but I also learned a lot about sales and marketing and what it takes to be influential and successful in that area.
Yeah, that's a really interesting skill set to have. You know, at one point in my life, I was thinking like, well, sales is all about convincing someone to buy something that they don't need. And yeah, but in reality, if you're a good salesperson, then, you know, you see what the other person needs, and you help him to satisfy these needs.
Yeah, that's the best type of sales engagement, is where you find someone that has a need, a problem to be solved, and you have a solution for them that helps them solve their problem. And do it in a way that's effective, saves them money. You know, that's just a great feeling. I remember one example where I went into a company and they had a problem they had worked about 80 hours on solving. It was basically like a data mining, exploratory modeling project. And they gave me their data, and live while I was sitting there in the room with them, they had literally opened the file and started analyzing it. In about 10 minutes, I had the answer that they had gotten over about 80 hours. And it was the tool and also the ability to know how to use it that really made that easy that found the answer. And, you know, that was an easy sell. That was an easy,
I can imagine. Yeah.
They were ready to sign the contract after that. It was good, you know, and it felt good. It felt really good to be able to do that, because I knew if they spent the time and invested the time in learning how to use the tool, they would be more effective at what they were doing in their business. So
yeah, that's really good. Like a good, you know, it's a good composition if you're a good salesperson, but also you know the product very well. So it's kind of a technical skill set of understanding what it does and how it works, and so to not only create a need and then, you know, send the contract, but also present and do.
Right. And you've talked a lot about communication on the podcast. In the training program, the Effective Statistician training program, we talked about that is one of the foundations of having influence and being a leader, is being able to communicate. And I learned a lot about communication. And communication isn't all just about saying everything you know. It isn't about talking all the time. Sometimes it's about listening and not not talking over the people that you're with. I remember a hard lesson I learned when I was in sales, where the sales rep that I work with, who is a wonderful guy, I just love him to death, but he had a slow way of talking. He just talked slow. And it would really make me uncomfortable. And of course, I'm a fast talker. And also because I think I know everything and I think I'm smart, I think I know all the answers too. So I kind of barged over him and just started saying, well, here's what you need, customer. You need A, B, C, D. You do this, boom, boom, get the software, you'll be good. And the meeting was over, and we left that meeting, and I'd never seen him mad at me before, but he was mad at me, and he said, don't ever do that to me again. And he basically said, I have a way that I talk to people, and sometimes it's on purpose. By talking slow and leaving gaps in the conversation and letting other people talk, you find out things that you wouldn't find out otherwise.
Which is true.
Like you might find out that, in a sales opportunity, not only does this group need some help, maybe this other group that's down the hall, they could also use the software too. Right? Mm-hmm. As a statistician that you're solving a problem with, you may by just asking some simple questions like, you think maybe anybody else is going through a problem like this too? And then not talking. People are going to start telling you all kinds of things you didn't learn before about, they have the same problem in this other group. It's kind of siloed from us in the business, but I have a friend over there and I think they have the same problem. And maybe sometimes you can make those connections and get people working together to solve the problems together, or at least identify the common problems that they have.
Yeah, I think having a gap in when you talk, just to give other people the chance to think, maybe to jump in. It's really a good approach. It's kind of the part of the active listening exercise. Yeah. After you worked with SaaS, you did return.
Yeah, I went back to Lilly, and they asked me to come back, surprisingly, and or I applied for a job and they invited me to come back, I should say. And what I wanted to do was try my hand at this area of big data and the predictive analytics. When I worked at SaaS, that's all we talked about, right? That was the buzzword: predictive analytics, big data, predictive analytics, predictive modeling. But I hadn't done a lot of that in my career, and I wanted to see if I could do it. And so I got hired in the advanced analytics group at Lilly, and we actually were working on supporting the sales and marketing teams doing marketing modeling and sales effectiveness modeling. And you may not know this, but they collect a lot of data in pharmaceutical sales and in pharmaceutical marketing. They have to. Many countries require that they do a lot of reporting. So every time a salesperson from a pharmaceutical company talks to a medical professional, a healthcare provider in the U.S., that gets recorded. And so the day they went to talk to somebody. And oftentimes they record things like, well, what did I talk to them about? Did I leave them a piece of marketing material? Did I leave them a sample of the drug that I would like them to sell? Different things like that. So all that data was available, and millions and millions of rows of data over a period of time could be generated from that. Same thing in marketing. They send emails and communications out to doctors, and they have ways when you open an email, or if you click on a link in an email, they track that. They would also track what doctors would come to seminars. They'd offer a thought leader seminar, right? Or someone who's an expert in oncology, a particular type of oncology area. And they'd invite doctors to come to a dinner and listen to this person talk. And they would record all those people. And so what they wanted to know was, well, which of these marketing methods and channels and sales methods and channels might be the most effective in increasing or driving sales of the drug product? And that's an important thing for pharmaceutical companies, because particularly while your drug's on patent, and you've got to grow the use of that drug as fast as you can, and you've got to sustain that over a period of time to get the financial benefit out of it, so you have the money to pay back your shareholders and also invest in future drug products. So it's a pretty important thing for pharmaceutical companies to know that.
Yeah.
And so I did that. I do these big data problems, trying to model the effectiveness of different touch points. We call them touch points. So whether a sales rep talked to a healthcare provider or they got an email from the company. And I discovered I really hated that work.
And, you know, I as part of this podcast and all the things, yeah, I also need to do a little bit in this, yeah, to see kind of, okay, should I do more LinkedIn posts or should I write more blog posts or, you know, should I record videos for LinkedIn or, you know, kind of webinars to run to attract more listeners to the podcast, all these kind of different things. And looking there into the data, well, I do it probably not as sophisticated like, you know, a big company does it, but yeah, I can also see how many people open my email, yeah, and
right.
Try
well,
to
imagine the time you have to take just to get the data ready and make a simple graph of it and think about it and magnify that hundreds or thousands of times.
Yeah.
And what I found was those jobs tend to be a lot about data and not a lot about analysis. The analysis isn't that hard, and honestly, the software does the analysis for you. I mean, you just got to program it and let it run. Sometimes it takes a long time, and you've got to do some work to make it more efficient. And that was probably what I enjoyed the most, is that some of the modeling I was able to work on doing distributed computing, where you could break it up into small parts and have parts of it run on different machines and then collect it all together. I enjoyed that a lot, but just the data side of it. And I don't know, I don't think I really clicked with the pharma sales and marketing group either. It just wasn't a great fit for me. So anyway,
it's a very different culture there compared to chemistry and manufacturing.
Yeah.
So how long did you stay there then?
That was about 2 years. And then I was very fortunate in that in the animal health division of Lilly, Elanco, they had an opening or an opportunity for someone to come work in development and research and development to be a CM&C statistician. Now, CM&C stands for chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. So it's basically being the statistician supporting all of the work that was going on for process development of new drug products, new drug substances, and all of the analytical methods that were used to test the quality of those materials.
Right. So animal testing is something that I never touched. I never got contact in. So it's so what was the difference then to?
So Elanco, which later was spun out into its own independent company, but they make medicines for animals. So they make tablets and injectables and creams and things for cats and dogs and pigs and cows and sheep and.
Yeah, so it's not animal testing, kind of toxicity testing then so that it's later been used in humans. It's really kind of, sometimes you take these active ingredients that are used in humans and then you use it for something else in the animals. Yeah?
Right. I mean, many listeners probably have taken their dog or cat to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian will prescribe a medicine for that animal, their pet, to treat a problem, whether it's a parasite or it's an infection or pain or something like that. And those have been developed by a pharmaceutical company to be used by patients, be sold through veterinarians or prescribed by veterinarians and used by patients. And it's very much like making medicine for humans. Actually, it's about almost the same as making medicine for humans, with the exception is when you make medicine for humans, you only got one species you got to worry about. And when you're a company that makes medicines for multiple species, that poses a challenge, right? Because I think you probably know this on working in the clinical area. You learn a lot about the biology of humans, right? And well, multiply that times 6, right? Because you need to know about the biology of 6 different species. And then, so and then there's a lot of different product forms that animals use that you would never use on a human.
Yeah, I can imagine. And the variability within, let's say, dogs is probably much bigger than the variability within human adults. Yeah. So
Right. And while I didn't work in the efficacy or safety area while I was there, imagine the challenges you would have trying to develop a drug for pain for a dog, right? Because the dog can't tell you that it's in pain.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, how do you know that dog's in pain?
And also for other things like a diary for a dog.
Right. Yeah. They're not going to go put a scratch on the wall every time.
Yeah, exactly. So
something happens.
actually, there's some interesting things that are probably now possible with all the AI and video recording and kind of how you can then detect patterns and things like this. So whether the dog is running, smoothly, or whether he's not running smoothly, which kind of indicates pain. Things that is today much easier to measure probably than it used to be in the past.
Yeah, probably there's either the ability to use a device like a collar that has a motion sensor on it. Mm-hmm. You can just track the amount of motion and the volume of activity. You can also, in controlled environments, maybe you could use a video camera and video an animal and, correlate the amount of activity or amount of motion or the types of things that an animal will do when they're in pain and when they're not.
Yeah. Yes, it's a really, really interesting area. And of course, you can do experiments that you probably wouldn't do with humans.
Well, that's true. It's the clinical trials run very fast with animals. Right. And that's what made it a real challenge in the area that I was working in. In human pharma, what takes the longest amount of time is to plan and execute and analyze the phase 3 clinical trial.
Yeah.
Right? And so that gives lots of time for other things to happen, like figuring out how you're going to actually make the final drug product and how you're going to test the quality. Well, in animal health, that's flipped around. The animal trials can go very fast. They can be done in 6 months, and you know what you need to know about safety and efficacy. And so that means you've got to compress that timeline on doing the CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, controls development work to as short a timeline as possible.
Yeah. So the kind of critical chain in the process looks very, very different.
Always on the critical path in that area. So that was a great experience. I love that in many ways. It was an international job, and that I got to travel internationally. I spent a lot of time in Europe and in Switzerland in particular, and met a lot of great people and enjoyed the culture there quite a bit. And then I learned a lot about drug product manufacturing that I hadn't learned before. Like I didn't know much about how a tablet is made, or how do you make a therapeutic protein or a monoclonal antibody. I didn't know much about that, but I learned. It was neat to learn that science.
That's cool. But finally, you also left that job.
Yeah. Surprise. I did something different. Yeah. So back this last August, I decided to leave Elanco and start my own consulting business.
I heard you once saying that actually the program from Gary and myself was kind of a little bit of a trigger there as well, or it enabled it a little bit to make it easier to take this risk.
Yeah, it was very helpful for me because as part of that program, I did a lot of introspection, right? I thought about myself a lot in a way like what's the best fit for me? What is the right type of work for me? What is the work that I'm best at? And what could I be the most successful at? And so actually I had at the beginning of last year, 2020, I sat down and I wrote down sort of like a 3 to 5 year plan. What did I think the next 3 to 5 years would look like? And I had on there, maybe in 3 to 5 years, leave and start my own consulting business, because I thought I would be good at that and I think I would enjoy it. But then in the middle of this last year, an opportunity presented itself where I could start doing that right away. And so I jumped at it. I decided, let's go. And it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I have a couple of really good, wonderful clients that I'm working for, and interesting work and interesting, good people to work with. So I'm thankful for that. And there aren't a lot of people like me doing that focus and specialize in the manufacturing statistics, manufacturing R&D statistics, and more particularly the non-clinical statistics area. And but for the people that I know that do that, a lot of them say they've always had work to do because there's always a need in these areas for people to come in and help. So I'm hopeful this will be a good, maybe a final career path for me. I don't know. We'll see. I've got probably another decade or two of work in me, and hopefully this will be a good path for me to be on for a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, I think there's something that's coming up for you at some point, given the history. Being a statistician, given the history. No, but it's just, it's amazing. And I believe what you just said is about the unique way, we've been talking through basically your career, and it must be unique. So there can't be anyone with the same kind of variety and type of, from military over animal testing and, the product line chemistry and back. So I believe you're absolutely right that this is quite a unique position that you are in. So good. And what actually are you then doing at the moment? So what is the type of work that you're spending your time with?
Well, I'm helping the clients I have on solving problems that they have within research and development and manufacturing. So an example would be you're developing a new process to make a drug product. And one of the things you have to do when you submit your application to get that product approved, whether it's in the US or in the Europe or other areas, as part of the common technical document in the CTD, there's a whole section on CMC, chemical manufacturing controls. And so there's lots of information that has to be generated. For instance, when I run this process, what are the critical quality attributes that define the quality of this product that are related to the actual safety and efficacy of the product, right? So it might be the potency of the drug, how much of the active content is actually in the drug product. Because you want to have an accurate dose, right? Because you determine the dose in research to say, this is the dose that's effective, so I need to deliver that dose. So you need to have a process that makes material that's on average, it's on target, right? It's always making things that are on average that dose. And in addition, not too much variation around that target dose.
Yeah.
And so what are the conditions in the manufacturing process that would allow you to do that? Other things would be, what are the parameters? Remember I talked about the system, and you have the inputs and the controls and the outputs. So what are the constraints I need to put around the inputs and the controls? Which of those are really critical to quality? Call those critical quality parameters, or critical process parameters, I should say, or critical material attributes. What are those things that I need to control and either have a specification on? So if I'm taking an excipient, what are the specifications that I need to have on that excipient for the drug product, so that drug product will be good quality? Or if temperature really impacts the amount of impurities that get formed during the manufacturing process, what's the range of temperatures that I need to operate within and stay within to be guaranteed that that material is going to have good quality? And so there's a lot of experimentation that goes into that, both using experimental design. And then there's also just a lot of exploratory data analysis. So you have a lot of data laying around that people have generated, and you've got to put it together and try to build a picture of what those relationships are and what the variability is.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So that would be an example of the type of problem you work on solving. It doesn't sound very complicated, and mathematically it's not. Lots of times the most complicated thing I do is make a graph. Right?
Actually, that is something that we will dive deeper in the next episode, where we will speak much more about non-clinical pharmaceutical statistics. So great to have you on the call, and great to have you on the podcast. I now need to say, it's a little bit of a different ending for me. Usually I say kind of, great to have you and goodbye to the interview guest, but today it will be different. It will be right. See you again.
See you again soon. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It's great to
very well
tell a little bit about myself, and I'm looking forward to this ongoing work together.
This show was created in association with PSI. Thanks to Rain, who helps with the show in the background, and especially thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about The Effective Statistician, then head over to our homepage, theeffectivestatistician.com. Find the show notes and learn more to boost your career as a statistician in the health sector. Reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients. Just be an effective statistician.